Those who grew up at the turn of the millennium in the UK will most certainly remember a little show called Takeshi's Castle. The show became a cult television hit around the world, and while the original episodes of the show were broadcast in Japan in the late 80s, it wouldn't be until 2002 that the show would be broadcast on British television, albeit in a more condensed form. Although I've watched the original as well as episodes of America's Most Extreme Elimination Challenge, the British version is the one I remember most fondly. And having gone on a bit of a binge recently, I thought it would be fun to take a nostalgic trip down memory lane and rank every game from the show from worst to best. Before we get started, a couple of points about what's on my list and what isn't. By my count, there were 110 different games on the original Japanese version of Takeshi's Castle, and while the vast majority of these are in the British version, I've condensed the list a little for the purposes of this ranking, primarily by combining games that were essentially the same. For example, there was a game called Cheeseberry Hill that featured in just one episode, but it's essentially the exact same game as Blueberry Hill, which featured more often. Similarly, Pushy Parents is the same as Slipway, just with parents pushing their child along the runway rather than the player pushing themselves. To that end, this list will contain a total of 100 different games to be ranked from worst to best. There are two games that I'm not including on my list as they're essentially an amalgamation of other games. The first is Rat Race, which sees players attempt Slippery Wall, Honeycomb Maze, and Skipping Stones back to back. And the second is the Ultimate Showdown, which is a mix of many different games. Lastly, throughout this video, I will be using the British names for these games rather than the original Japanese names, as those are the names most familiar to me. This is my own personal list of favorites, and I'm sure you will agree with some and disagree with others, so please let me know your favorites in the comments below. With the housekeeping out of the way, let's dive into this video, ranking every Takeshi's Castle game from worst to best. Okay, here we go. One game has to come last, and on my list, it's The Final Fall. This game whittles the contestants down to the remaining few before the final showdown, and the reason it's last on my list is that there's no skill involved here, it's just pure luck. Contestants must choose the correct hole in the ground or their run through Takeshi's Castle comes to an end. Not a lot going on in this game, it's literally just watching people jump into holes in the ground, except this hilarious moment when the boxing monster just straight jabbed someone in the face. Despite that, for me, The Final Fall takes last place on my list. At 99, it's Brat Sack. This game was only played once during one of the family special episodes, and the aim of the game is for each parent to find their child who is tied up in a sack with only their arm sticking out and get them across the finish line. A few funny moments in this one, such as some of the parents dragging their children along the ground, but overall not the most eventful of games. Next, it's The Fortress. The aim of the game is simple, find one of the golden balls hidden in the garden. Not the most difficult or challenging of games, but it did produce a few wacky moments, such as this when the contestants were trying to get the balls out of the guard's costume. Anyway, not enough to be any higher on this list. At 97, we have a game called Animuddle, in which players have to pick up a jigsaw piece and then find the other contestants who have the other 3 pieces to finish their puzzle. This game was never featured during the original UK run, but was featured once during Takeshi's Castle Rebooted in 2013. Not the most entertaining of games, so 97th on the list will do. Next is Roulette, where all of the contestants first choose a disc from a powder bath that contains a number from 0 to 36, or the words odd, even, red, or black, and then sit on the corresponding square on the giant roulette table. If the roulette ball drops on the number or word they're sitting on, they are out of the game. I bet this was fun to play with so many contestants involved, but as a spectator, it's not entertaining enough to be placed any higher on my list. At 95 is a game that doesn't need much of an explanation, Matchmaker. Simply pick a shape and find the corresponding hole to put it in. If a player chooses a shape for which there's no corresponding hole, they're eliminated. A simple game, good for whittling down the contestants, but not particularly entertaining. Footloose is next at number 94. This game was only played once and simply involved contestants choosing some footwear and then racing to make it across the finish line. The difficult part was the big sticky area before the finish line that would cause some of the contestants to become stuck to the ground. Shoot 'n Loot was a game that replaced the final showdown on the original run's last episode. Players basically had to fire balls at moving prizes to win them, but the better the prize, the smaller the target. There was even 1 million yen on offer written in gold on a small box, but this box moved much faster than the other prizes, making it a lot more difficult to hit. A great game for the players to pick up some nice prizes, but not a great game to watch. The original final showdown was much more entertaining. Next, we have two games that I'm treating as one, Drop in the Ocean and Sandscript. These were played as the starting games during the final episode of the original run, in which 1,000 contestants took part. In Drop in the Ocean, a helicopter drops hundreds of balls into the ocean, and players simply have to grab one to go through to the next round. Then, in Sandscript, all of the players with the same colored ball from the previous round have to create a human-sized Japanese character on the beach. A calligraphy expert then determines which team's character looks the worst, and they are out of the game. Two impressive looking games here due to the sheer number of people taking part, but not entertaining enough to be placed any higher than 92nd. In at number 91 we have Deep Float, a game that takes place on the beach and players simply have to scramble their way onto the raft in the middle of the water to go through to the next round. There's only limited space on the raft though, and the guards do everything they can to stop people climbing aboard. Number 90 is Omaha Beach, which obviously is also played on the beach. This is quite a long obstacle course that involves running across 6 slippery platforms in the water, followed by a swim to the shore. Then players have to drag a large rake behind them up the beach, and then reach a loop of plastic which they must get inside and roll up the beach. And then finally, the last obstacle is a slippery wall. This game looked like it would probably be quite tiring, particularly with the slippery wall at the end, which is no easy feat on its own. A fun game, but by no means one of the best games on the show. At 89 we have Rojimbo, a game that I was tempted to put a bit lower down on this list as it's essentially just rock paper scissors with a bit of dancing. Hilariously ludicrous, but not enough to be any higher on the list. Next we have Stuff Diving, a game that I actually hadn't seen before as it wasn't played very often. A group of contestants in a swimming pool are asked a question and then must dive down to the bottom of the pool and retrieve a card with the correct answer to the question on it. I don't even know what to say about this other than it is simply ridiculous. 87 on the list is Space Invaders, another game that was never featured on the UK run of Takeshi's Castle. This game was played right before the final showdown and saw players sit in a small cable car traveling down towards the front of Takeshi's Castle. The goal was to make it to the bottom without letting the sensor on their cable car get hit by the guards' lasers. If they made it safely down to the bottom, or were able to shoot one of the guards' sensors on the way down, they would make it through to the final showdown. Definitely better than the final fall, but nothing to write home about. In the Sack is next, and this was only played once during one of the couple specials, and simply involved finding your partner among the hundreds of contestants and claiming one of the pink beds. An easy game in which speed is the key to victory, but this was unfortunately never going to be high on the list of best games. Next is another game we only ever saw once, Die or Pie. First, each contestant rolls a dice to determine which hole they must sit in, with 1 being closest to the pie thrower and 6 being furthest away. They then sit in this hole with their head sticking out and hope that the pie thrower misses. The pie thrower in this game was Yutaka Inatsu, who is widely regarded as one of the best Japanese baseball pitchers of all time. I'm assuming that this game was created simply because Yutaka was available to attend the filming of the episode, and it was definitely a fun game that was enjoyable to watch, but only enough for 85th on my list. Giant Maze is next at number 84. This was only played once during the 1987 New Year special episode, and there's not really much to this game, just get through the maze as quickly as possible. I loved this part when Craig Charles just gave up on pronouncing the name of the Japanese national park this game was played in.
Just some Japanese national park.
Next, we have a game called Buggy Me, played during a special middle schoolers episode. This starts as a simple obstacle course where players go under a hurdle and a net and then grab a rice cake from the pot of flour, but then contestants grab an envelope with a number inside that corresponds to the rickshaw they have to carry across the finish line. Some of the rickshaws were light and easy to carry, others not so much. I'm sure this was a fun game for the contestants. At 82, we have Mud Skippers. Super simple one this, just drag your way through the mud flat, grab one of the red and blue ribbons halfway, and make it to the finish line. Definitely a few showers were needed after this one. At 81, it's another game I hadn't actually seen before called Samurai Back. Players start wearing samurai outfits and have to cross a balance beam before taking the costume off. They then strap a bucket to their backs and have to catch a ball that's been blasted high into the air. This looked incredibly difficult. After this, players go over a wall, down a slide on the other side, and then have to pick up some food with their mouths. Finally, they wear a mask on the back of their heads and run backwards across the finish line. We only saw this game once during the show's original run, but like a lot of the generic obstacle courses on this list, isn't entertaining enough for a higher ranking. At number 80, we have the Midoriyama Marathon. Of all the games in Takeshi's Castle, this could very well be the most grueling. Contestants have to run around an exhausting course and get to the end as fast as possible to progress to the next round. There's a lot of running, jumping and rolling in this, and it looks incredibly tiring, but compared to other games later on in this list, it can't be placed any higher. Next is a game called Line Up, in which players grab a bib with a Japanese character on it, form a line with other contestants to spell out the name of the show, and then perform a kind of 6-person 3-legged race to the finish line. We only saw this game twice, but it definitely looked like fun for the contestants. Did you ever play Pop-Up Pirate when you were a kid? Well, this game called Roll Out the Barrel is the human-sized version of that game. Contestants sit on top of the barrel and then choose 3 holes to put the swords in. There are 6 holes in total, 4 of them are safe, but the other 2 will cause the lid of the barrel to lift up, sending them crashing into the drink. Looked like a fun game, this one. Back to the beach for number 77, Stockpot Racing. This is another obstacle course of sorts, with the final goal being to grab one of the large vegetables, either a leek or a carrot, and run into the giant cooking pot to proceed to the next round. We only saw this game once, which is probably a good thing, as it's not the best of games to watch. At number 76, we have the first version of the Final Showdown. This was only played during the first 4 episodes of the show in Japan, and involves players attempting to reach the top of Takeshi's castle while protecting their paper rings from being pierced by the Emerald Guard's water pistols. The goal was to reach the top and pierce Takeshi's paper ring and win the game. But after the 4th episode, the Final Showdown was changed to the much more familiar version 2 with the carts that we all remember. And this was definitely an interesting showdown to end each episode, but in my and many other people's opinions, the other version of the showdown is much more iconic and deserves a higher placing on a list like this. Another obstacle course at number 75, but this time it's in the snow. The usual kinds of obstacles here, with the highlights being the slow march up the hill wearing the spherical fox costume, and the slide down the other side while sitting in a rubber ring. A few hilarious fails in this one, very entertaining. Bit of a weird game next at number 74, Barry's Go-Go. This was played during the special family episodes and saw each parent stand on a remote-controlled platform wearing a large Barry costume while their children stood high above the racetrack and drove them around to the finish line. It was their parents' job not to fall off their platform. It's when you watch games like this that you think, what on earth is going on here? Gladiators fans will like this next game, Prod, which is similar to Duel. Contestants choose a colored ball at the start to determine who they will be prodding against, and then must stand on a small round platform and push their opponent into the water. Definitely not as good as Duel on Gladiators, but still quite fun. This was played in episode 130 of the original, which features games from a variety of different locations, and this game prod was from the Taiwanese version of Takeshi's Castle. Yet another obstacle course next, this time with bikes. Not much to say about this one. It's funny, it works, but it's not the best. Let's move on. Something a bit different next, called Naughty Ball, in which teams of contestants play a short game of volleyball on a floating raft in the sea, and the first team to score 3 points wins. There were a few different teams the contestants could play against, which was chosen randomly at the start, including the Emerald Guards, an actual women's volleyball team, and some women in swimming costumes. Looks fun, and I can see what they were going for here, but not enough to get a higher ranking on my list. At 70, it's Uphill Garden, a staple of the early episodes in Japan. The aim of the game is to reach the top of the hill, but pursuing each contestant is a member of the Emerald Guard. Both contestants and guards have water pistols and paper rings, and it's pretty obvious what's going on here. Pierce the guard's ring to continue, lose your own ring, and you're out. A fun and wacky game, but nothing too spectacular. We are only at number 70. At 69, we have this interesting game that only ever featured in one episode, Flag Down. A team of contestants and the Emerald Guard both have poles with flags on the top, and the aim of the game is to bring down the other team's flag. Love the slow motion shots during this game. I quite like this, but it only ever featured once, and for that reason it has to appear lower down on this list. Next is Karaoke. Appearing in 24 episodes, in each round a contestant would enter the karaoke bar and sing a song. The only problem is that they wouldn't know which song would come on before entering the bar. In that case, they could just make up their own lyrics or dance, whatever it took to entertain the spectators. And if their performance was amusing enough, they would go through to the next round. Otherwise, they would be ejected from the bar by the bouncers. It is quite entertaining listening to the terrible singing and watching the reaction of the spectators, but it's not the best of games. I'm sure Japanese people who know the songs would enjoy this more than foreign audiences, but for me, it's only good enough to reach number 68 on my list. At 67, it's Leapfrog, and you know, this is actually quite a good game that definitely had potential. Contestants slide down a tall ramp into the pond below and have to jump off onto one of 2 floating platforms, one of which moves and the other of which is fixed in place. It looks a little bit too easy though, and only ever appeared in one episode. But maybe if the platform they slid down on went a bit faster and traveled across the water more, then this could have been a great game. Muddy Waters is next, and it's almost exactly the same as Mud Skippers from earlier, except in this game there's no flag to grab and the contestants don't have to crawl on all fours. It's just a simple race across the mud. No idea why I prefer this one when they're both basically the same, but in any case, Muddy Waters takes 66th place on my list. One of the better starting games here at number 65, The Great Wall. Not much explanation required here, just get over the wall as quickly as possible. Definitely an easy game for the tall people of the world. This was the opening game in 43 of the original episodes, and so it became a staple of the show. But there are better starting games that we'll see a little later. I remember riding a bucking bronco like this at some party I went to at university. In Takeshi's Castle's Dino Ride though, contestants have to ride a Getasaurus and shoot a pink bat with their water pistol. If they get the bat wet enough, it will fall and they win the game. Definitely looks like a lot of fun and a tough challenge for the contestants. Yellow Brick Road takes number 63 on the list. In this game, contestants first choose one of 5 doors and then must take a circuitous route across the field of play, essentially just changing direction each time they reach a junction until they reach a set of stairs at the end. At the top of each set of stairs is a slide, and at the bottom of 4 of the slides is a big pile of mud, while 1 leads to safety. A fun game, but it only appeared in 1 episode. Another game from one of the parent-child specials next, called Turtle Soup. In this game, both parent and child are dressed up as turtles, and the parent has to crawl along a narrow path while carrying the child on their back. However, the parents are blindfolded and can't see where they're going. Fall into the drink, and you're out. A good idea for a game, this one, and although it doesn't look too difficult, no pair were actually able to reach the goal. Who doesn't love a good tug of war? Well, in the Takeshi's Castle version of this game, contestants first choose a rope without knowing who is on the other side. It could be a really easy opponent, a group of school children, or even a bulldozer. From there, it's normal tug of war rules. Pull your opponent until the marked section in the middle is over the center line. A simple game that produced a few fun moments. At number 60, we have a really great game called Turtle Hurtle. Imagine skipping stones, but in the sea. The aim of the game is to run from one side to the other across these slippery turtle-shaped platforms. But that's not all. After a few seconds, a guard is released from the starting point, hell-bent on making sure the contestant ends up in the drink. I really enjoyed this game, but it only ever appeared in 3 episodes. Had it been a more frequent occurrence on the show, it would have certainly placed higher on my list. We all know how popular baseball is in Japan, and it was only a matter of time before we saw a baseball-themed game on this list. Here at number 59, we have Mudslide, in which contestants have to attempt to steal second base after the pitcher throws the ball to home plate. If they're able to steal second base in time without being called out by the umpires, they proceed to the next round. Of course, the main thing here is the big pile of mud stationed directly in front of second base. Definitely looks like a lot of fun, this one, and as you'll guess, there will be a few more baseball-themed games a little later. I'm putting the second version of the Final Showdown in at number 58. Although it's an iconic game played at the end of a whopping 123 episodes, it's not the most fun game to watch on TV. I enjoyed watching it, hoping to see one of those few episodes where someone actually wins, and I'm sure this was a lot of fun to play in person, but watching it on TV later, it's not the most entertaining. I can't decide if I prefer the paper ring version or the laser version more. Probably the paper ring version, as I feel there's a little more skill involved, but they're much the same. I considered putting this a little higher due to how ubiquitous and iconic it was, but again, it's just not as entertaining as some of the other games higher up on the list. So, 58th place is the best it's going to do. Back to the obstacle courses now, and we have this one that only ever appeared in one episode, called Streets Ahead. A lot of these obstacle courses are pretty much the same. The gimmick in this one is that they start wearing sumo costumes, which is quite hilarious to be fair. Not much else to say about this one. I enjoyed it, but 57th place seems about right. Next is another great game I wish we had seen more of, Go Nuts. In this game, contestants have their feet tied together, wear a giant acorn costume, and have to hop along a narrow path to the other side. A few funny fails in this, and definitely a game that should have featured more often, but unfortunately it only appeared in one episode. At 55, we have this great game called On Your Bike, where contestants ride children's bicycles around a track with seesaws and narrow paths. We only got to see this game twice during the show's run, but I really enjoyed it. Nut Roll is at 54, and this is another great game that only got one appearance, and incredibly, this was due to the fact that shortly after this game appeared on TV, an arsonist broke into the studios and set a fire, and this was one of the casualties of that event, meaning we only got to see the game once. The game is kind of like a mix of Blueberry Hill and Avalanche, where contestants, all padded up to hopefully avoid injury, must make their way to the top of the hill while trying to avoid the large nuts rolling down. This was a lot of fun. Definitely would have loved to see more of this one. Back to the baseball themed games next with Home Run, where contestants dress up in a giant baseball uniform costume and have to make it across a narrow beam while attempting to avoid being knocked off by the huge baseballs being swung at them by Animal. I loved this game, the costumes were ridiculously large and every episode it featured in was enjoyable. Thumbs up from me for this one. If you thought Nut Roll was good earlier, then you'll probably like this game, Dodge Rock, which was played during the special Monsters episode. This time, 3 players attempt to get to the top of the hill, dressed in a variety of weird and wacky costumes, including this pretty impressive looking elephant costume. Would have loved to have seen more of this game too. At 51, I've combined 2 games into one. The more common, Bite the Bun, appearing in 18 episodes, and Sand Flea, which was played in the final episode of the original run and is quite similar. Bite the Bun again looks like the kind of game that was probably a lot of fun to actually play, but not so great on TV. Still a good game though, and one of the better starting games. We enter the top half of the list now, and at number 50 we have Big Bird. Dressed as a bird, the contestants are pulled along a wire towards a platform with a big rabbit on it, and the goal is to pick up the rabbit and take it to the other side. Doesn't sound too difficult, does it? Well, it's definitely a lot harder than it looks. I think they could have added some water into this one and had the contestant dropped into the water if they'd failed. That could have added a little more to this game. Nonetheless, still quite entertaining. Gridiron is next at number 49. I loved this game as a kid as I was really into American football when I was young. We saw this game in 15 different episodes and there were a variety of different rules used. Sometimes it was just one contestant on their own, sometimes a group of contestants, and one time contestants chose a card before they started that decided how many guards they had to avoid. However, the overall goal remained the same: reach the end zone with the ball without going out of bounds or getting stopped by the guards. Next on my list is Quake, a game in which a group of contestants sit in a room on a pile of cushions and have to stay balanced until the earthquake ends. We saw this game quite frequently, in 26 episodes to be exact, and there's something about it that I quite like. I think it's just hilarious seeing the contestants trying to balance on their cushions. At 47, it's Slipped Discs, a game we saw very frequently, appearing in 75 episodes. All of the remaining contestants attempt to make it over a large bunker occupied by the Emerald Guard. Everyone has paper rings and water pistols, which we've seen before in other games, and the aim is simple: get over the bunker without your paper ring getting pierced by the guard's water pistols. The contestants also had water pistols, and if a guard had their paper ring perforated, they were no longer able to shoot the contestants. Absolute chaos this game was. An excellent game next at 46 called Wet Paint. At the start, the contestant fires an arrow at a spinning wheel which selects a random Japanese character. The character they choose is what they have to paint with a giant brush on a very slippery slope. They only have 30 seconds to complete the character, so time is of the essence. If they are able to successfully paint the character, they go through to the next round. Otherwise, Strong and Kibaji, who are at the top of the slope, wash away the character and the contestant with it. We only saw this game twice, and I would have loved to have seen it more, as it produced some hilarious moments. At 45, it's Sling Swing Fling, a game that only appeared in the very last episode of the original. Contestants start on a high platform and are attached by harness to a rope. They are then pulled along this wire and must pull a cord on their harness to lower themselves down to grab a ball and then throw this ball into the basket at the end. Really interesting game this, and a shame that we only saw it once. I think it could have turned into a classic if given more time. A little bit of human curling next with this game called On the Rocks. Yet another game we only saw once. Contestants simply have to make their way to the goal at the end without falling off. A couple of guards also sweep the ice as they're moving in curling style, but this isn't really doing anything and is only used to try and put the contestant off. Kinda reminds me of Slipway, this one. Great game. Fish Food is next at 43, and I bet this game is so much harder than it looks. Contestants are pulled along a runway and have to jump over the fish and duck through the mouths of the sharks until they reach the other side. This one produced so many great fails. I really enjoyed this game. Another wintry game next with Take It Snow. I was very close to putting this much higher on the list because it's essentially the same game as Skipping Stones, which is absolutely incredible, except this game is played in the snow. Some absolutely spectacular fails in this game. I really enjoyed it. The second time we saw this game, the snowmen were replaced with what looks like Russian dolls, but other than that, it's the same excellent game. Next, we've got this crazy game called Roll the Dice. This was played during the couples episode, in which both wear giant dice costumes and are rolled down a small hill. If the numbers they both land on match the odd or even choice they made before the game started, they go through to the next round. I think Craig Charles summed up this game pretty well.
Not the kind of game you'd play on a Sunday afternoon with a hangover, is it?
At number 40, it's End Bell. Again, a game we only saw once, but I thought this was a great game. Contestants stand on a raft and come down a giant slide into the water. They have to stay on the raft until they reach the other side, then climb a slippery slope and ring the bell to go through. Definitely would have loved to see more of this. An excellent game. An interesting one next at 39, it's Bridge Bowl. Not Bridge Ball, we'll see that later, but Bridge Bowl. This was actually featured in a special International Battle episode and was not broadcast in the UK, but I'm including it on my list as I think it's quite a good game. In order to win, contestants simply have to carry a golden ball across the small narrow bridge while avoiding the wrecking balls that come flying at them. Not much footage of this one, with it only appearing in that one episode, but I liked it. Definitely a good game. We've got Pipe Down next at number 38, and again just one outing for this game. Contestants start at the top of a platform and then slide down a long fabric tube. All the contestant has to do is fall out of this tube at the right time and land on the floating platform in the lake. Contestants can go down face first or feet first in this game, and I think face first looks way more scary, but it's definitely the way to go in order to catch a glimpse of where the platform is before you arrive at it. Great game this. Next, it's Up the Creek. In this game, contestants sit in a large wooden box above a giant pool of mud. They then pull themselves along until they think they are directly above the safe platform and then pull the lever to open the bottom of the box. If they guess successfully, they would land on the platform and be safe. If not, they would land directly in the mud. Some of the landings in this one looked like they must have been painful. A tricky game next for number 36, it's Bridge the Gap. In this game, contestants must attempt to get from one side to the other by crossing two rotating planks. This game caught a lot of contestants out, as many underestimated the speed of the planks or lost their balance from changing from one to the other. We saw this game 11 times across the show's run, and the game was first played over powder-covered foam mats, but this was later changed to be played over water. Great fun, this game. Boulder Dash was quite similar to Dodge Rock and Avalanche in that contestants had to get from one place to another while avoiding falling rocks, only this time they are running from one side of a steep hill to the other. We only saw this game once in the very first episode of the show's original run, and it was scrapped directly after. But I think this could have turned into a great game if there were a few changes made. Maybe the hill was a little too big, meaning the contestants had plenty of time to see the boulders coming, so I think it could have been good to put some kind of screen up so that the contestants wouldn't know where the boulders were coming from. In any case, I thought it was a good game. Back to the snowy games next with Toboggoth at number 34. I absolutely loved this game, which is essentially just a winter version of Rice Bowl Downhill, a game we'll see a little later on this list. Just cling on to your rubber ring for dear life and reach the finish line. Some of the contestants built up incredible speed on this game, resulting in some hilarious fails. Definitely recommend this game. Next, we're back to the bicycles, but normal-sized bicycles this time. Contestants have to wear a large whale costume with a bike inside and make their way around the track, all the while facing a variety of obstacles looking to knock them down, such as a bumpy track, a seesaw, and cannon fire from the guards. We actually saw a few different versions of this game with different obstacles, and even one time a straight track but on an ice rink. Really great game this, lots of hilarious fails. At 32, it's this crazy game called Extinction, in which guards dress up in animal costumes with oversized heads, and it's up to the contestant to knock their head off by firing balls at them. I wouldn't have liked to have been a guard during this game, as many of us who have played football know exactly what it's like to get hit in the face. A funny game this one, but we only got to see it twice. At 31, it's Show of Hands, a game that isn't particularly difficult, but there's something about it I find hilarious. A group of contestants dress up in giant hand costumes and then must be the first to jump onto the card that contains the correct answer to whatever question is being read out. Sometimes the cards contained a Japanese character, sometimes a number, and in one episode they were the titles of different pieces of music. Just watching these oversized hands run around and jump on top of each other was hilarious. Thumbs up from me for this game. We've now entered the top 30, and at number 30 itself is Mudball. What I love about this game is its simplicity. All you have to do is catch the ball, but the thick, slimy mud made for some great fails in this game. We also saw this game played in the snow once, which looked like it might have been more difficult as it was played on a slope. At 29 we have Knock Knock 2, which is the starting game version of Knock Knock, a game we'll see a little later on this list. This game is definitely not as good as the individual game, but for me it's one of the better starting games. Contestants make their way through the doors and then have to grab a colored ball from the powder bath to secure their place in the next round. I would have loved to have played this game in real life. Next, we have a game that was only played once in the very last episode, but I absolutely loved it. Contestants have to stay on a floating raft as it's pulled along by a speedboat, going through 2 lines of buoys and over a large ramp. After this, they have to stay on the raft and jump onto a floating platform at the end. Looks like a lot of fun, this one, and I think it would have been quite popular if it had appeared in more episodes. We're slowly starting to get towards the truly great games now, and in at number 27, it's Blueberry Hill. In this game, a group of contestants dressed as giant blueberries have to proceed up the hill but must completely freeze whenever the guard at the top turns around and looks at them. If he catches anyone moving, they are promptly pushed back down the hill. Make it to the top and you're through to the next round. We got a few different versions of this game, including a few episodes where the game was played in the snow, a couples version of the game, and even a completely separate game that was exactly the same called Cheeseberry Hill in the UK version, even though the contestants were actually dressed as giant potatoes. In any case, I loved watching this game, and I think I would have been pretty good at it. One of the better 2-player games next at number 26, Walk the Plank. 2 contestants, always families or couples as this game was played during these special episodes, have to get from one side of the water to the other by evenly distributing their weight across the planks in front of them as they walk. The key to this game is synchronicity and balance, but so many teams were absolutely terrible at this, including this girl who just fell in before the game had even started. Another great team game next, Whack the Stack, which was only played during the family special episodes. The child sits on top of a giant stack of discs and it's their parents' job to, as the name suggests, whack the stack while their child times their jump at the right time. I think the key here is the child's jump. If they get that right and the hit from the parent is strong enough, the disc will come flying out. They have to achieve this twice in order to win the game. Definitely one of the better games played with parent and child. I enjoyed watching this one. My favorite starting game next, it's Slippery Wall. Well, it's a toss-up between this and Knock Knock 2. In Slippery Wall, contestants have to make it to the top of the slippery slope and over the other side, but it's definitely easier said than done. Oftentimes, contestants actually work together to build human ladders in order to reach the ropes that were placed near the top of the wall that would help them get over. We saw this starting game in 16 episodes, making it one of the more common starting games in the show. Next is the runway, in which contestants are slid along a runway and are shown a mathematical sum, which was always just plus and minus some numbers. They then had a few seconds to quickly figure out the correct answer, and if they were wrong, they would be dumped into a pit of powder or mud. Watching this on TV, this doesn't look that difficult as the sums are always quite straightforward, but I bet in the moment it was extremely difficult. At 22, we've got Skittles, and I've combined this with another game called Puck Over, as they're essentially the same game. In Skittles, contestants draw cards that determine their position in the lineup, and then wear giant Skittle costumes and wait for the huge bowling ball to come down the hill and attempt to knock them over. Basically, just stay on your feet and you're through to the next round, which was made even more difficult by the fact that their feet were bound. Puck Over is essentially the same game, except with an ice hockey theme, and the contestants would lose the game if they fell off the platform they were standing on. Absolutely loved this game, definitely one of the highlights of the episodes it featured on. At 21, we have this absolutely crazy game called Indestructible, in which a contestant is curled up into a big plastic ball and rolled down a gigantic pachinko machine. If they happened to roll down into the goal section, they would go through to the next round. I'm surprised they were allowed to do something like this, and in fact this game was so scary for contestants that it was removed after only appearing in 6 episodes. Having said that, I would have loved to have had a go at this. We're into the top 20 now, and next it's one of the most iconic Takeshi's Castle games, Sumo Rings. Contestants first choose a colored ball that corresponds to which guard they will be wrestling against, and then it's just a simple sumo wrestling match to determine the winner. Of course, some of the guards were easier than others, including an actual professional sumo wrestler. This game was played 33 times and became a staple of the show. At 19, it's our final baseball-themed game, Catch It. Dressed in giant baseball outfits, contestants have to attempt to catch a baseball that has been hit high into the air. This was a hilarious game that looked like a lot of fun to play. Next, we have the Dragon Lake, an absolute classic. The aim of the game was to simply swing on the rope and land on the platform, but the game went through a few different variations. In the show's very first episode, the game looked a little too easy, but this was promptly changed from the next episode onwards, with the game looking a lot harder, and the addition of a giant mud pit below them led to some hilarious fails. Much later in the show's run, the game was again changed to have the contestants swing in a circle from the starting position around to the finish, and this looked so much harder than the original. Finally, in episode 130, there was a version of this played in the sea, where the contestants started quite high up and had to traverse a much greater distance to reach the small floating platform. This is definitely one of my favorite games from the show, hence why it deserves its place towards the top of this list. We've got The Gauntlet next at number 17. Beat Takeshi was originally inspired to create Takeshi's Castle by the release of Super Mario Bros. In 1985, wondering if Takeshi's Castle could essentially create a real-life version of the game, and this influence can definitely be seen in this game. In The Gauntlet, contestants had to complete the obstacle course faster than the pink devil that was racing them from above, meaning they couldn't just take their time on each stage of the course. There were a number of different zones on the course. First, 3 guards try to stop the player progressing before they have to run across a backwards moving conveyor belt as boulders are dropped on them from above. Then it's over the rotating caterpillars, a bounce off the trampoline into the foam pit, and then avoid the wrecking ball as you cross the narrow path. Next, contestants have to carefully cross the water over a rotating plank, run to avoid the 3 wrecking balls, and finally use a rope to swing across to the finish line. The course was changed slightly as the episodes went by, including the inclusion of some high rollers and monkey bars, but it largely remained the same. An excellent game that I always enjoyed watching. Great game next at number 16, it's Slipway. I've combined this with a game called Pushy Parents because it's basically the same as Slipway, except it's the parents pushing the children along the runway rather than the player pushing themselves. In Slipway, contestants just had to stop within the goal area at the end to win the game. Go too far and they end up in the drink, stop too short and they're pushed into the drink anyway by one of the guards. With 24 appearances of Slipway and 4 appearances of Pushy Parents, this became one of the most well-loved games on the show. Roller Derby is next at number 15, a game that sees contestants wear roller skates and dress up in giant plastic horses. This game was originally just a straight race to the finish line with no obstacles to handle, but after its first outing, the show added some hurdles along the path, making this game much more difficult. This game produced some great fails from the contestants and is certainly remembered fondly, one of my favorite games to watch. At 14, it's Ball Cupping, a staple of the later episodes. At the start of the game, the contestant hits a ball into a giant pachinko machine and then must race to the bottom, wait for the ball to drop, and then jump to catch the ball in the pan they're carrying. This looks like it would have been quite a difficult game to succeed in, but certainly a lot of fun and hilarious seeing contestants dive into the mud. We're getting towards the good stuff now, and at 13, it's Single Roller. The little cousin of a certain other rolling game we'll see later, this game requires contestants to balance on a roller all the way across to the other side, and my goodness, this looks difficult. The distance that they had to cover in order to make it to the other side was really far, meaning not a lot of people were successful at this. But we all had a bit of fun watching the incredible fails as the contestants lost their balance. Despite only appearing in 3 episodes, this was one of my favorite games, and I wish they had featured this more often. Next, we've got Velcro Fly, another absolute classic. Wearing a Velcro boiler suit, contestants have to swing across the water and stick themselves to the Velcro wall at the other side. One of the most hilarious games on the show for sure. Some contestants were absolute masters at this, like this guy just absolutely nailing the landing, while others couldn't quite figure out how to even swing across to the other side or jump too high at the beginning and hit their bum on the way down, making the journey across almost impossible. Absolutely loved this game, always a treat when it came on. And the last game not making it to the top 10 is Avalanche. Starting at the bottom, contestants have to make their way up to the top while avoiding the giant boulders being rolled down towards them. There were some gaps in the walls on either side that the contestants could use to avoid these boulders, but usually there would be guards in there trying to push the contestant back out. And after using one of the gaps, it closes up, meaning each gap can only be used once. I think this game has the right mix of physicality and unpredictability to make it a classic game, but just not quite good enough to make it into my top 10. We're into the top 10 now, and for me, number 10 is Wipeout. From the starting platform, contestants step onto a surfboard that carries them around the lake, where they must jump over a pink whale and land back on the surfboard, jump onto a platform and back onto the surfboard when it reappears, jump over another pink whale, and then onto the finishing platform. This game produced some of the most incredible and iconic fails in the show's history, and makes it into my top 10 in 10th place. Number 9 on my list is Mushroom Trip, which required contestants to hold onto the stalk of a giant mushroom for dear life as they are spun and flown across the lake. The object was to drop from the mushroom onto the finishing platform to proceed to the next round. Contestants needed incredible upper body strength to succeed at this game, which produced some classic moments. There was a variation of this game played in episode 130 called Corncob Trip, which is identical except the contestants are holding on to a giant corn on the cob. Really enjoyed this game and it makes 9th on my list. Next we've got what I think is one of the hardest games on the show to win, Dominoes. One look at this game is enough to work out what the goal is, but there were 15 dominoes to cross and I think the odds were stacked well against the contestants in this one. However, from a viewer's perspective, this was incredibly fun to watch and produced some absolutely hilarious results. Of course, there were people who were able to complete this challenge successfully, and kudos to them for having done so. Number 7 on my list is occupied by one of the most iconic and memorable games from the show, the Honeycomb Maze. During the first 15 episodes of the show, the maze was square rather than honeycomb shaped, and is regarded as a different game, but for me they are essentially the same, so I've combined them for the purposes of this list. In order to progress to the next round, contestants have to get from one side of the maze to the other without going through one of the doors leading directly to the drink, and without getting caught by the guards inside. I've always wondered what the optimal strategy is in this game. Is it to go slowly and not alert the guards of your presence, creeping your way around to the exit? Or is it to do what this guy did and just absolutely blast your way through? In any case, this is one of the all-time great Takeshi's Castle games, and Honeycomb Maze and Square Maze together appeared in a combined 89 episodes, and rightfully so. An incredible game. At number 6, it's yet another incredibly difficult game, Bridge Ball. The object was to get from one side of the narrow bridge to the other while carrying the golden ball, all the while being absolutely pelted by balls from the guards. Some of these hits looked like they must have been incredibly painful. The very first version of this game was called Rope, and required contestants to get across the ravine while clinging onto, you guessed it, a rope. But from episode 5 onwards, this was changed to the Bridge Ball we've all come to know and love. There were a few different variations of Bridge Ball, including times when no golden ball had to be carried and some episodes where there were rocks on the bridge that needed to be passed. But for the majority of the times it was played, the contestants had to catch the ball and take it to the other side. Arguably the most iconic Takeshi's Castle game here, being played in a whopping 74 episodes, including as its earlier variation of Rope. Always fun to watch, and makes it up to number 6 on my list. Into the top 5 now, and my pick for the 5th best Takeshi's Castle game of all time is Poles Apart. I fully expect that this will be a lot lower on other people's lists, but there's something about this game that I absolutely love. It's relatively similar to the earlier versions of Dragon Lake, except contestants have to get across to the platform on a pole rather than hanging on a rope. which I think increases the difficulty significantly as it's really hard to control where the pole is going to take you. This game is based on the traditional Dutch sport of canal vaulting, or vierliepin, which is incredible to watch. Highly recommend checking that out. With 24 episodes featuring poles apart, it became one of the most loved Takeshi's Castle games, and for me is number 5 on my list. Rice Bowl Downhill takes 4th place on my list, a game that I suspect will be near the top of many people's lists. In this game, contestants sit in a bowl at the top of a large water slide and are pushed down to the bottom. Win the game if you stay in the bowl after you've crashed into the water below. This is one of those games that I was always happy to see come on while watching Takeshi's Castle, always entertaining and so much fun. This game was even played during the couple episodes with both contestants sitting in the same giant bowl on their way down the slide. Excellent game and number 4 on my list. Top 3 now, and at number 3, it's High Rollers. What an excellent game this was. The object of the game is to get from one side of the rollers to the other, but this is by no means an easy task. There were some absolutely spectacular fails during this game that made it one of my absolute favorites to watch. When this game first debuted, there were only 3 rollers, a much easier task, but this was soon increased to 5 and then 7 rollers, significantly increasing the difficulty. Absolutely one of the best games Takeshi's Castle ever created, and having appeared in 54 episodes, it was a staple of the show. Taking 2nd place on my list is the hilarious Knock Knock. We saw the starting game version of this earlier, but the individual game is miles better. The game actually debuted as an extension to Skipping Stones, which you might have guessed is going to be next on my list. After successfully completing Skipping Stones, contestants would then be faced with a series of doors, and if they chose the right one, they would be through to the next round. This only lasted for a couple of episodes though, before Knock Knock was turned into its own game with 4 rows of doors for the contestants to get through. This game really was incredible, and it was sometimes scary watching the speed at which some contestants would throw themselves at the doors, sometimes head first. There surely must have been some injuries from some of these. This was very close to being number 1 on my list, but there's one other game that stands just above the rest. That's right, number 1 on my list, the best Takeshi's Castle game of all time, is Skipping Stones. What do I even need to say about this game really? An absolutely incredible and iconic game. When I think of Takeshi's Castle, I think of this game first. Simply get from one side to the other while crossing the stones in the river, most of which are fixed in place, but some of which move. Appearing in an incredible 85 episodes, this is the most iconic Takeshi's Castle game by far, and just had to be number 1 on my list. We saw contestants attempt this game in a variety of ways, from tentatively making their way across, being careful to choose which stones they stepped on, to the downright crazy people approaching the stones at incredible speeds. It is said that the crew of Takeshi's Castle loved this game because the fails it produced looked spectacular without causing any injuries. Compiling this list has taken some time, and I've thought carefully about each entry and its position, but I always knew that this was going to be number 1. My favorite game by a mile, and I'm sure this will be near or at the top of many people's lists. And so, that does it. That is my list of every Takeshi's Castle game ranked from worst to best. What are your thoughts? Do you agree with my list? Would you have put any of the games in different positions? What would you say is your top 5? Let me know all your thoughts and comments down below. And if you're enjoying the kind of content I'm putting out, I would love it if you could subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching everyone, and see you in the next one.